Hey guys, welcome back to the series where I talk about the leadership in turbulent times by Doris Kearns Goodwin. Today we're going to be talking about the 26th U.S. President, Theodore Roosevelt. Contrasting from Lincoln's, Roosevelt's election statement was 33 words long and devoid of promises, pledges, and personality. He acted as if his nomination was already secured and simply acknowledged it in his statement. As a sophomore at Columbia Law, Roosevelt was chosen to run by his Republican boss as the candidate with whom he thought he was most likely to win. Interestingly, Roosevelt later said that I had at that time neither the reputation nor the ability to have won the nomination for myself. Theodore's father was a highly respected philanthropist for poor children. So in other words, Theodore Roosevelt was a Nepo baby, meaning he had come to attention through relation and wealth. However, Theodore made sure to take advantage of his opportunities with full swing. Through much difficulty, he started by taking the initiative to join the local Republican Association. Tracing the narrative that led from his first run for office to the White House, Roosevelt distinguished two general types of success. One belongs to the man who had in him the natural power to do what no one else can do and what no amount of training, nor perseverance or willpower will enable an ordinary man to do. Number two, which is more common, man's ability to develop ordinary qualities to an extraordinary degree through ambition and the application for hard, sustained work. Goodwin says, self-success is democratic, and Roosevelt said, open to the average man of sound body and fair mind who has no remarkable mental or physical attributes. Roosevelt lines himself up with the second type of success. As a child, bronchial asthma weakened him. His father never gave up on him, carrying him through the night, whether through the house or town or village. My father, he got me breath, Roosevelt said. With the weakening of his body came the strength of his mind. He was always reading or writing, and he had the ability of strong concentration. His father encouraged his spiritual and intellectual development. Theodore could comprehend and remember very well. His father made sure of Roosevelt's great education. Because of his sickness, he was homeschooled. His father would always invest in Theodore's interests and had exquisite travels planned for them. From Rome and Greece to Lebanon and Egypt, noticing that Teddy was becoming physically weaker, Theodore Sr., his father, built a gymnastics gymnasium in their backyard, and then hired an ex-prizefighter to train him. Through his preparation for Harvard entrance exams, he did not skip a day of his rigorous exercise. Theodore studied Greek, Latin, history, science, and math, finishing a 3-year course in 2. He hated procrastination and thought it was a sin. Obviously, he was admitted to Harvard. In Harvard, he participated in tons of clubs, worked out, joined sports, and continued his interest in birds, joined a prestigious social club, consistently went out to Sunday school, and even went to weekly dance classes. He had many role models which gave him confidence and goals, but his biggest was his dad. He combined strength and courage with gentleness, tenderness, and great unselfishness. Not only my best and most intimate friend, but a beloved mentor whose advice I heeded above others. When his father got ill and passed away, Theodore was in great sorrow. In fact, the whole town mourned the great man. Soon later, he fell in love with Alice Lee, and 10 months later, they were married. Theodore went on multiple sojourns in the woods of Maine. It was there that a Maine guide recognized his leadership first, through his interactions with all sorts of people. After trying and figuring out he was not interested in biology, the only type of natural science Harvard offered, nor was he interested in law, he started going to the working-class political Morton Hall. Like Lincoln, Theodore's appearance was peculiar, from his monocle to his tight waistcoat and trousers. However, like Lincoln, once first impressions faded, people strongly connected with both of them. When campaigning, Roosevelt said these statements: I am owned by no man. I will enter the legislature untrammeled and unpledged. I will obey no boss and serve no clique. The next day, 25 endorsements from politicians came in, and on election day, he won. On his first day as state legislator, Roosevelt quietly observed the first session, and then later he interrogated each of the assemblymen, seeking out information and soaking it up just as much. 2 months in, he got the hang of it and was a rising star. I rose like a rocket, he said. He really enjoyed politics because it encompassed the activities he found most enjoyable and fulfilling. speaking, writing, connecting with people, and assuming the center stage. He was then chosen as the youthful minority leader of the Republican Party and elected for a second term. When Republicans were criticized by Democrats, Roosevelt would respond harshly, despite his friends' pleadings not to do so. Because of this, his friends deserted him, and Roosevelt only noticed his egocentric behavior when he failed to gain support for several projects. As a part of the upper class, he was biased. He was against all governmental schemes for the betterment of social and economic conditions of laborers. However, after visiting the factories and tenements himself, he made a quick turnabout and immediately supported the bill he once opposed. From these happenings, his sense of empathy grew. Overcoming all this, he now felt he had the reins in his own hands. Roosevelt's mother died from typhoid, and half a day later, his wife passed away as well. Afterwards, Theodore buried himself in legislative work, pushing reform bill after another. He did not listen to his fellow assembly members' criticisms. The pity of his friends only went so far. He retired from the state legislature and spent a few years replenishing at a ranch. In his own words, "I would take the memory of my life on the ranch with its experiences, close to nature and among the men who lived near her." During his interlude, he wrote about the ventures of his life. Through these years and months, he not only went through healing, growth, and self-transformation, but also renewed his confidence in himself to become a great future guide and leader. On top of mental strengthening, he was also physically stronger. Through both the death of his wife and mother and time spent at a ranch, Roosevelt's philosophy of leadership was also elevated, and by the summer of 1886, Theodore Roosevelt was ready to re-enter the world of politics. Short thereafter, he was invited to a position as a part of a civil service commission. Roosevelt believed that civil service law represented a signature battle in the war against corruption, and so he took the offer. At his new position, he was very successful. He ultimately took the bulk of the work, leaving his fellow board members in the dust. And this leadership grew famous and set up the carpet for a true merit system and respect for the civil service law. His aggressive and ambitious way of leading also got around. When William Strong was elected for mayor of New York, knowing of Roosevelt's strength, he offered Roosevelt the most challenging job, chief of a 4-man police board. And of course, Roosevelt accepted. This time he was not let loose by his board members. In fact, they could not stand him. "All he does is talk, talk, talk," said one. He believed power should be concentrated in the hands of one man, so long as that man could be held fully responsible for the exercise of that power by the people. Roosevelt was very popular. Scarcely a day would pass without a feature in the newspapers. For Roosevelt, publicity was not just to bask in the public's attention. Public sentiment was his single most potent instrument for driving change. He looked up to veteran police reporters Jacob Riis and Lincoln Steffens for guidance. Riis depicts the immigrant ghettos in a book of his. When Roosevelt read it, he immediately contacted Riis, saying, "I've come to help." From then, a lifelong friendship was conjured. Observing how the police force was very disorderly and corrupt, Roosevelt got to work. He started by putting the superintendent and his inspector on trial and getting them fired by exposing the hundreds of thousands of dollars in their bank accounts that they could not account for. As for the patrolmen themselves, he disguised himself and personally confronted off-duty men. He believed that they were caught in a bad system, but not bad men. So Roosevelt introduced technological advancements, merit-based promotions, and recognition ceremonies. He got the morale of the police force to heal and begin to restore. Roosevelt's corruption and crime-fighting exploits had made him a compelling figure across the country. After the relentlessness of Roosevelt's supporters, President McKinley offered the post of Assistant Secretary, and Theodore snatched it up, per usual. As much as he was a subordinate, Roosevelt took full advantage of his boss, Secretary Long's unfamiliarity with the Navy. He made sure to master the world of the Navy. After the relentlessness of Roosevelt's supporters, President McKinley offered the post of Assistant Secretary of the Navy, and Theodore snatched it up, per usual. As much as he was a subordinate, Roosevelt took full advantage of his boss, Secretary Long's unfamiliarity with Navy terms. He made sure to master the world of the Navy and built Long's trust. Cuban complications led to an American warship to be stationed near the coast of Cuba. For unknown reasons, it blew up and killed For unknown reasons, it blew up and killed 250 plus Americans. Knowing of this, when Long left for a day of rest, Roosevelt set a bunch of orders to acknowledge the brimming war, even though Long had told him not to do a single thing without consulting himself or the president. When Long came back the next morning, Roosevelt was not fired. In fact, 9 weeks later, America sent a note to Spain declaring war. Roosevelt was let go under the pretense of home and personal troubles, driving him excessively nervous. If it had not been for Roosevelt, we should have not been able to strike the blow we did at Manila. The chairman of the Senate Committee of the Foreign Relations remarked, "It needed just Roosevelt's energy and promptness." American Army officer Leonard Wood later observed that few men would have dared to assume this responsibility. But Theodore Roosevelt knew that there were certain things that ought to be done and that delay would be fatal. He felt the responsibility, and he took it. For Roosevelt, being a subordinate was never confused with being subservient. I believe that this part of the chapter immensely summarizes Theodore as a leader. Shortly after war was declared, Roosevelt stepped down from assistant secretary and signed up for the army. When he was placed in a leadership role in war, he handed it down. Theodore was capable of weighing his strengths and weaknesses, and he realized commanding a bunch of men's lives was not a strength he possessed. Unlike Wood, the person he passed it on to, who had served and received a Medal of Honor. Although he was not commanding, he still did a lot for the team of men. First, promoted the Navy publicly, bringing in 20,000 applications. Second, organized a system that forced a common denominator of teamwork under everyone's unique identities. And third, he had led by sharing his life with the men, by his own willingness to do anything he asked them to, by never asking them to suffer anything he wouldn't suffer first. Back from a successful war, Roosevelt decides to run for governor. The experience of war had once again brought back the changed man. He now had a newfound composure, patience, and maturity. He won the election, by the way. As governor, he constantly made sure to fit petitioners into his schedule, whether through planning ahead of time or switching things around at last minute. And when conversing with them, he was eager to hear what they had to say and encouraged discussion and debate around the meat of the topic. His enemy was Bob Platt, let's say because of jealousy. So he convinced President McKinley to put Roosevelt as vice president. Apparently in the world of politics, VP is a graveyard for political careers. You never get to the change of presidency. However, when an assassin's bullet killed the president, Roosevelt was now pres. And the youngest one ever, too. Roosevelt's introduction to presidency was not the most ideal. He decided to keep McKinley's cabinet. At the start of his presidency, he promised to keep the most important event in the labor movement of the United States, the Great Coal Strike of 1902, shows the mood of rebellion among labor classes, the United Mine Workers. They were on strike for 6 months. Although Roosevelt was told he could not lawfully nor politically intervene, he went ahead. In the spring, he calculated the risks of getting involved, secured a reliable understanding of the facts, causes, and conditions of the situation, and remained uncommitted in the early stages. In the summer, he used history to provide perspective, be visible to cultivate public support among those affected by the crisis. In the fall, he cleared the deck to focus with single-mindedness on the crisis, assemble a crisis management team, document proceedings each step of the way, and control the message in the press, and find ways to relieve stress. Ultimately, the Great Coal Strike, Roosevelt facilitated negotiations between the miners and the coal operators, ultimately securing a compromise known as the Gentleman's Agreement. This agreement resulted in a 10% wage increase for the miners, a reduction in workday from 10 to 9 hours, and the establishment of a commission to address future grievances. Overall, Roosevelt's leadership was best at crisis management. He was always ready with multiple strategies and had contingent moves prepared. He was definitely a man who left a record behind for the future. Theodore Roosevelt's leadership was a great ability of determining what to do and when to do it. And if he knew what to do and when to do it, he would do it, no hesitation. He firmly believed in himself and his knowledge, and this confidence brought him his great leadership. At times, he was in the wrong and aggressive, but he learned from his mistakes, and that is the most important of all. This was my summary of the Theodore Roosevelt chapter in Leadership in Turbulent Times by Doris Kearns Goodwin. I hope this was helpful, and I hope you enjoyed. Bye!